Welcome to the Debunkers Podcast.
Okay, hello everyone and welcome. You know that feeling when you're really trying to do your part for the planet, separating recycling, maybe giving up plastic straws, and then you see a headline about some celebrity's private jet pumping out more CO2 in like a week than you do in years? Yeah, that feeling. Today, we're diving right into that, into the fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty infuriating world of the climate blame shift. We're going to unpack how the whole story around climate responsibility got so well twisted. Our mission here is to pull back the curtain, figure out who's actually holding the biggest slice of the responsibility pie and how that message gets, conveniently pointed somewhere else. We'll look at the history, some really eye-opening current examples, and where we might go from here. It's a deep dive into accountability, greenwashing, and some facts that are, frankly, pretty startling.
Yeah, and what's really striking is just how deep this blame shift runs. It's not just shaping how we think about the problem, it's actually getting in the way of effective climate action. We'll explore how this narrative affects how we respond collectively to this huge global challenge and why understanding it is just so crucial.
Okay, let's get into it. Where did this whole idea of individual responsibility come from, especially for stuff like litter or, carbon emissions? Was it always like this?
Well, we can definitely point to a really effective early example. Go back to 1971. Remember that crying Indian ad, the one with a tear?
Yeah, very famous. Very impactful.
Super impactful. But here's the thing. It was funded by big packaging companies, like American Can Company, Owens Illinois Glass, through this group called Keep America Beautiful. And the ad's message was all about blaming individuals for litter. People start pollution, people can stop it. Remember that line.
Right. And meanwhile, those same companies funding the ad, they were lobbying against things like bottle deposit laws, against rules for sustainable packaging.
Exactly. Well, you called it cynical. And it was.
It really was. Even environmental groups back then, like Audubon, Sierra Club, they resigned from Keep America Beautiful. They saw it for what it was, early greenwashing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The campaign wasn't really about tackling the root cause, the sheer amount of disposable packaging being produced. It was about manipulating feelings, images, to put the responsibility squarely on you, the consumer. It basically wrote the playbook for deflecting environmental blame. And that playbook got a major update later on. Fast forward to 2005. BP, a giant oil company, right?
Yep.
They popularized the term carbon footprint. They ran this big ad campaign, literally asking confused people on the street about their personal emissions.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? This carbon footprint idea pops up right around the time companies like ExxonMobil were being outed for knowing about climate risks since, the 80s.
That's the timing.
While they were funding climate denial. What a coincidence, huh?
All right, the timing, yeah.
So while we're all calculating our personal footprint, stressing about flights or plastic bags, just remember this statistic. 100 fossil fuel companies are linked to 71% of global industrial emissions since 1988. 71%.
It's staggering.
And even narrower, just 20 companies, responsible for 35% of all energy-related CO2 and methane worldwide since 1965. So the real picture isn't about whether you remembered your reusable bag, though that's good. It's about this massive concentration of emissions from a tiny number of huge players. But the conversation stays focused over here on us.
Yeah, the scale is just completely different.
Okay, let's make this even more concrete. Let's talk about how this blame game plays out right now in the headlines, like the whole Taylor Swift private jet thing.
Right, that became a huge focal point. In 2022, her private jet emissions were reported at 8,300 tons of CO2.
8,000? How much is that in, normal people terms?
It's roughly the same as the annual emissions of nearly 2,000 average individuals. Almost 1,800, yeah. And get this. Just one flight, Tokyo to Vegas for the Super Bowl, right? That single 12-hour flight apparently produced 200,000 pounds of CO2. That's like 14 average U.S. households' entire year of emissions.
Just one flight. And didn't reports say she used the jet, almost every day for a while?
Yeah, something like 170 out of the first 200 days one year. It was pretty extensive use.
And the response is often, oh, but they buy carbon offsets. What's the deal with those?
Well, that's the claim. Swift's team says they buy double the needed offsets. But investigations into the offset market, they show a lot of these are scientifically dubious, let's say. Forestry projects might overestimate their impact, or the carbon they store gets released later through wildfires or logging. It's often called a license to pollute, basically greenwashing.
So pay some money, look like you're doing something, but keep polluting.
That's the critique, yeah. And it highlights this stark hypocrisy, doesn't it? You have these high-impact polluters using questionable offsets, benefiting from loopholes. Like private jets are often exempt from carbon pricing or fuel taxes in places like the EU. Meanwhile, ordinary people get scrutinized for using a plastic straw.
The scales are just wildly off. How much worse are private jets, really?
Per passenger. Around 50 times more carbon than taking a train. And maybe 14 times more than a commercial flight. It's significant.
50 times.
Yeah. So the focus on individual plastic use, while not irrelevant, seems tiny compared to the sheer volume of single-use packaging churned out by corporations. Globally, only 9% of plastic actually gets recycled? 55% just ends up in landfills.
And now we're finding microplastics in human blood.
Exactly. And yet the narrative still circles back to the consumer's carbon footprint. It's ironic, really.
Okay, so beyond celebrity examples, let's zoom out to industries. You mentioned the plastics industry.
Right. This is a huge one where the deflection works really well, often with government help, actually.
Yeah.
In the U.S., we're talking billions in taxpayer subsidies going to build or expand plastics plants, almost $9 billion for just 32 plants recently.
Billions of our money subsidizing plastic production.
Yeah. And here's the kicker. 84% of the 50 newest or expanded plants violated their air pollution limits. 84%.
That's almost all of them. And who lives near these plants?
Disproportionately, it's people of color. 2/3 of the nearly 600,000 people living within 3 miles of these facilities. So companies make promises about environmental safety to get the subsidies.
Right.
Then they fail. They release illegal levels of pollution, often blaming it on malfunctions.
And the consequences, fines, losing the subsidies.
Rarely significant penalties. And the subsidies. They're almost never revoked, no matter how many times they violate their permits.
Never. So taxpayers are essentially funding pollution in vulnerable communities, and there's no real accountability.
That's what the data suggests. It points to a system where profit seems to come way before public health or environmental promises.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Look at Indorama in Louisiana. Got $73 million in tax breaks. Then, in just 5 months, released over 90 times its legal limit of VOC's volatile organic compounds. Nasty stuff.
90 times. What did the state do? Huge fines. Shut them down.
The state approved changes to their permit 4 times to allow them to pollute more.
You're kidding. They allowed more pollution.
That's what happened. Or Shell in Pennsylvania. Got $1.65 billion in subsidies. Then had 51 malfunctions, exceeding air pollution limits repeatedly. Or an ExxonMobil joint venture in Texas, $249 million in subsidies, 63 environmental violations in under 2 years. The pattern is pretty clear.
Wow. Okay.
It really forces you to ask, or if companies know the risks, keep polluting and get taxpayer money to do it. What does accountability even mean in this context? It really looks like a system prioritizing profit, undermining sustainability, all while putting up this green front.
Which brings us to the bigger picture. Governments seem, well, kind of involved in this, don't they? You look at something like the Paris Agreement, lots of ambition, but no real teeth, right? No binding enforcement. Emissions keep going up.
Exactly. The UN itself admits we're drastically off track for the 2030 targets.
It feels like what some call regulatory theater. Like the EU has super complex chemical rules, but is enforcement actually consistent?
Often not.
Or US pesticide rules exempting minimum risk products that still contaminate water. It looks like action, but maybe without real impact.
It creates that veneer, a feeling that things are being handled.
And look where the money goes. Fossil fuels still get, $1.8 trillion a year in subsidies globally?
Trillion. With a T.
While climate finance for adaptation and mitigation covers maybe 10% of what's needed, and rich countries keep falling short on climate aid they promised to poorer nations.
It points to something deeper, doesn't it? The sheer influence of powerful vested interests.
Like lobbying.
Absolutely. Yeah. Take the fossil fuel industry in Canada. In 2023 alone, they had over 1,200 lobby meetings with the federal government.
1,200 in 1 year.
That's almost 5 meetings every single workday. And they target the ministries in charge of climate policy.
Of course they do.
And they've been caught doing some pretty audacious things, like drafting policy proposals themselves and getting overworked government staffers to submit them as official briefing notes on government letterhead.
Whoa. Okay, that's next level.
And there's fascinating new research on regulations, too. It shows that support for environmental rules makes a real difference only when it comes from companies.
Wait, say that again. Only when companies support it.
Yeah. If NGOs or environmental agencies push for it, it doesn't have nearly the same statistical impact on whether the regulation gets adopted.
But most companies oppose these regulations, right? And most environmental groups support them.
Generally, yes. And the study points out that the national authorities making the final decisions often have biases the public doesn't even know about, and their influence is huge.
So if a company says, yeah, okay, regulate us on this, it might actually happen. But if campaigners are screaming about it, it's just noise. That's quite something.
It paints a stark picture of where the real power to shape policy lies.
And maybe because of all this, the blame shifting, the lobbying, the regulatory theater, it feels like the whole conversation around climate change itself is shifting.
It really is. You can track the narrative frame. Think back to the 90s, 2000s, early 2010s. The main message was kind of save the planet.
Yeah, recycle, Kyoto Protocol, polar bears.
Exactly. Now, in the 2020s, the dominant frame feels much more like save humanity. It's about managed retreat from coastlines, disaster response, adaptation.
Why do you think that shift happened?
Well, partly it's the sheer immediacy of the crises.
Yeah.
We're seeing massive displacement, over 20 million people a year forced to flee climate-related disasters. Economic pressures are huge too.
Yeah.
Think about inflation, forcing people in some places back to using coal for heating because it's cheaper. Survival basics.
And maybe just exhaustion, like threat fatigue.
Definitely. There's a psychological numbing that can happen. Disengagement. It becomes this kind of survival triage focus, shifts from healing the planet to just helping humans cope with the immediate impacts.
But who is actually coping? Who's bearing the brunt of these impacts?
The data here is just brutal and incredibly unfair. Countries in the global north are responsible for 86% of the emissions that have pushed us beyond the safe planetary boundary. 86%.
Just the global north.
Primarily. The U.S. alone accounts for 38% of those excess emissions. The EU is 28%. Meanwhile, China is about 1%, and the entire rest of the global south combined is only 11%.
So the countries that did the least to cause the problem
are suffering the most. It's an almost perfect inversion. It's not just emissions. People talk about a climate debt. The global north has essentially used up its own fair share of the carbon budget, and the budget needed to stay below 1.5 or even 2 degrees Celsius warming. And this warming directly threatens human survival. We're seeing more frequent, more intense heat waves. The heat index, factoring in humidity, makes it feel even hotter, pushes bodies past their limits.
Heat deaths are a major issue now, right?
Huge. In the U.S., extreme heat kills more people annually than cold snaps, hurricanes, or tornadoes. Around 1,500 deaths a year. Remember the 2003 heat wave in Paris? Nearly 15,000 people died. And projections show it's going to get much worse, especially in tropical and subtropical countries.
And it's not just heat stroke. Climate change worsens everything else.
It's a threat multiplier. It fuels competition over shrinking resources like land and water. It hits food production, drives hunger. We have nearly 800 million chronically hungry people now. That could hit 1.8 billion if warming reaches 4 degrees Celsius.
Billion.
It forces migration, increases poverty, deepens inequalities, and makes security risks worse, especially for women and girls.
So just to recap, while the narrative focuses on our plastic straws and our carbon footprints, the parts of the world least responsible are facing mass displacement, starvation, conflict, while the wealthy polluters buy dubious offsets as a license to pollute. It's
a stark reality.
Okay, so if focusing on individual blame is a distraction, if governments are often complicit or influenced, what actually works? What can be done?
Well, we need to shift focus to systemic accountability. Things like extended producer responsibility laws, EPR. These force industries to deal with the end-of-life costs of their products, make them internalize the environmental damage.
So make the polluter pay, basically.
Essentially, yes. And liability lawsuits, using those detailed emissions databases to actually sue the major corporate polluters for the damage caused.
What about policy changes?
Big ones could be banning private jets for short trips. You mentioned that 65% of flights in Europe are under 750 kilometers. That's drivable or trainable.
Right.
And crucially, redirecting those trillions in fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine shifting that money towards renewable energy infrastructure, towards green banks that help finance the transition.
And what about us as individuals feeling anxious or overwhelmed?
Well, interestingly, research shows individual actions like recycling, while good, don't do much to reduce climate anxiety.
Why not?
Because what really helps is collective action. Working with others. It builds social connection, gives you a sense of agency, of efficacy. It builds hope.
So the message isn't do nothing, it's do something, but do it together.
Exactly. Don't just act as an isolated consumer. Act as part of a group, pushing for those bigger systemic changes. And when we look at climate policies that have actually succeeded, what do they have in common?
What's the secret sauce?
It's usually a smart mix, often including tax or price incentives, combined with strong regulations. Just regulations alone or just subsidies alone often aren't enough. You need enforceable rules, and you need the political will to actually implement them. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, for example, putting $27 billion into green banks to help companies finance cleaner tech, that's an example of government stepping up to facilitate change.
Okay, so it really does come back to shifting the focus. As the sea levels rise, as microplastics show up everywhere, it's becoming blindingly clear, isn't it? Plastic straws didn't melt the glaciers. BP, ExxonMobil, systemic subsidies, private jets. That's what melted the glaciers.
That brings us to a fundamental point. The planet itself. It'll probably be fine in the long run. It'll outlive us. The real task is ensuring that humanity can outlive the current economic system that's driving this crisis. So the question for everyone listening is, what will you do now to help shift that focus away from misplaced individual guilt towards demanding real systemic accountability? But sadly, it seems we've run out of time for today.
Thank you so much for listening and for being such an engaged part of our podcast.
We always value your participation.
Until our next deep dive together.
Goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time.